So we're facing a brand new challenge for humans, which is the challenge and the problem of overabundance, and how we will live in a world in which not only do we have more than what we need for many people, if not most people on the planet today, but we have this primitive wiring that is, it has engineered us to be these relentless seekers.
It's just, and that begs the question, in a world of overabundance where everything's so normalized, the standard American diet, the processed food, the alcohol, the vaping, I mean, in my kids' high school, vaping is just rampant. The social media, of course, I try to be that parent that limits the social media, right? But still, it is such a drug. And even I find myself looking at my phone mindlessly. But it's normalized. No one ever says that I have an addiction or that my kids would be addicted to their phones. So what is the definition of an addiction in a world where we all are addicted and to all of these normal behaviors? And then I also want to bring it to alcohol. Like during COVID, all of my mom friends who are stuck with their kids Zooming at home and losing their minds, it became normal to drink 3 to 4 glasses of wine every night by yourself or on a Zoom with your friends, and just normally eating all day long because of stress and anxiety. And it's that vicious cycle of the anxiety leads to more of the drug, the more of the drug leads to more anxiety, and that pain pleasure seesaw that you talk about. So I have so many questions in my one question, but what is the definition of an addiction?
So addiction, broadly speaking, is a form of psychopathology. So we consider it to be a disorder. That's important because we'll often use that term casually or colloquially, and that's fine. But when I'm using it, I'm really talking about a form of psychopathology or a disordered brain. And broadly speaking, it's the continued compulsive use of a substance or a behavior despite harm to self and or others. And that may be harm that we recognize, and it may be harm that we don't recognize, but that would be recognized by other people who know us well and who observed us in our lives. It's a complex biopsychosocial disease. It's not based on the quantity or the frequency, although quantity and frequency matter. The more of the drug we use and the more often we use it, the more likely we are to get addicted to it. The simplest distillation of the criteria that psychiatrists and other mental health care providers use to diagnose addiction is the 4 C's: control, compulsions, cravings, and consequences. Control means I started using a certain amount, I planned to limit it to a certain amount, and I found myself repeatedly going over that amount. Compulsion means a lot of my mental real estate is focused on that drug, getting the drug, using the drug, hiding my drug use, and that I find myself initiating drug use with some automaticity that might be outside of my conscious awareness. So finding myself reaching for my phone, even when I said to myself, I'm not going to go on my phone in the next hour. Craving has to do with the intrusive thoughts and images of using, or even physiologic signs and symptoms that we feel will only be relieved by using our drug. And then finally, the 4th C is consequences. That's the physical, emotional, relationship, professional consequences that we incur as a result of our drug use. And then particularly when we recognize there's a problem, our inability to stop using it. So the continued use despite consequences. So you'll notice all of those are complex behavioral descriptors. They're not actually anything that has to do with physical dependence, tolerance, and withdrawal. But that doesn't mean that physical dependence, tolerance, and withdrawal aren't important. Tolerance, for example, is needing more of the drug in more potent forms over time to get the same effect, or finding that the drug stops working. That's a very classic symptom of entering addicted brain. And dependence and withdrawal are the manifestation of those withdrawal symptoms, mental and physical, that occur when we try to stop or cut back.
Yeah, and then just taking alcohol for an example, someone that's not addicted to alcohol yet, but they're drinking maybe 1 to 2 drinks a night, and that level of dopamine is being dulled, or right, that deficit is getting bigger. So then they just need that a little more, and then they need a little more, and the behavior just continues. And so it doesn't have to be this huge addiction. It can just be a minor dependency where it changes the behavior, and a little more anxiety when you don't have that one drink. So I just wanted to emphasize that, and maybe you can touch on that it doesn't have to be this drastic addiction. It can be just a minor dependency where it's changing your dopamine, that seesaw of pain and pleasure.
Yeah, I think that's important. You know, this image of the wino with the bottle and the brown paper bag, you know, passed out under the city park bench is something that we really need to do away with, because addiction can affect all of us in many different ways. And addiction is a spectrum disorder. And most of us, I would venture to say, have some kind of minor compulsive loop, some kind of consumptive behavior that we aren't happy with, that we repeatedly wish we did differently. We might not meet the threshold criteria of addiction, but we're sort of pre-addicted, and maybe with a little escalation of that behavior, we could enter into the zone of full-fledged self and other harmful behaviors. So that's right. And oftentimes the consequences are subtle and, importantly, incremental. So this is not something that we necessarily can see coming. It's the result of repeated behaviors, I would say, typically daily repetition of certain behaviors, the cumulative effect of those over longer periods of time that we can't see as it's unfolding. So importantly, in my book, Dopamine Nation, I do talk about how I got addicted to romance novels, and I'm an addiction specialist, right? And while it was happening, I really honestly didn't see it. I would occasionally joke, oh, I'm addicted to romance novels. But, I really didn't see it. But at some point further down the road, because of an interaction I had with a student of mine, where we had to role play, and I was then talking about my reading habit. I did not share with him what it is. Just in saying that to him, it crystallized the behavior in a way that hadn't previously been apparent to me, even though I'm an addiction specialist, right? And all of a sudden, then I saw the behavior more clearly for, the harm that it was, albeit subtle harms, things like not getting enough sleep because I was staying up late at night reading, not being fully present for my children or my husband or my patients in the way that I want to be, and in a way that's congruent with my values. So it's really fascinating what an insidious process it is, how invisible it can be to us as it's occurring, but how with repetitive behaviors over many days, we can find ourselves in a very different place than we plan to go or than we want to be. So I think that's an important piece.
And some of the behavioral addictions are that gray area. It's not like cocaine or heroin or the hard drugs that everyone says you do once and you're in trouble. But it's the social media, the novels you're talking about. Exercise can be one, and food can definitely be one.